Welcome to part 4 of the Supporting English Language Learners module as part of SUU's Global Engagement Academy. In this video, our focus is on providing opportunities for students to speak and write. So in previous videos, we talked about highlighting the language of your field, and then we talked about providing and modeling good reading and listening opportunities. This video focuses on speaking and writing. So our goals here is one, to talk about affect and how creating a safe learning environment is more likely to get students to produce language. We'll also talk about consensus between you and your students. Do they understand your assignments in the way that you understand them? And then lastly, we'll talk about helping students set realistic goals for their language development. Here's our keywords for this module. First, we want to talk about the affective filter. The affective filter in the field of linguistics is a barrier that can come between a learner and their ability to learn and perform. And so this can often happen when someone is nervous or anxious or maybe angry about a learning situation, and it can prevent them from learning to their fullest ability. This sometimes happens in language learning when we feel an inhibition that prevents us from really participating fully and feeling open to what we're learning. Also, our word here, intelligible, or the noun form, intelligibility. This is our focus here as, can someone produce language that can be easily understood? It may be accented and may have some regional qualities to it, but it's clearly understood by others. So let's take a moment here and just talk about culture shock, because this relates to our discussion about the affective filter. And you've probably heard of the culture shock theories before, but often when we move into a new culture, in the beginning, it can be very exciting and interesting, but over time, we can experience some distress as we notice differences between what our expectations are and what our reality is. And this can lead to homesickness and other kinds of problems that can prevent someone from being successful because they have these cultural adjustments that are preventing them from feeling positive and being healthy and engaging with their community. What we want to be able to do is make sure that we're providing an environment that helps someone adapt to the new culture and eventually become successful in it. And if you notice students who are experiencing the distress part of culture shock, it's good to reach out to them and find out what you can do to help them, or connect them with resources and other people who can help them make that adaptation. It's also important to understand that the educational environment we provide at our university may be very different from the educational experience that international students come from. They may not be comfortable participating in class because they're not used to a classroom where there is any kind of participation. They may be nervous about making mistakes because they feel like you have to present a front of always being correct. And they may be very uncomfortable meeting with an instructor one-on-one because of cultural reasons. And so we need to present and be explicit about what our expectations are and let them know that we're really there to help them. It's okay to make mistakes. We want them to ask questions, but also be patient with them if they struggle to accept and adapt to our culture as quickly as we might hope. But the more you can create this safe environment and let people know that you're trying to learn about their expectations and you want them to feel comfortable performing to your expectations, the more you can create an environment where you can see that kind of growth. So let's talk about comprehensible input now. Previously, we talked about comprehensible input. Now we want to talk about the output. There's the theories of input say we need to have text that is at level so that learners can understand it in order to process it and understand its meaning. The output hypothesis says that we need to give opportunities to speak and write in order to really acquire language. That process of being forced to produce language, either through our speech or our writing, is really where part of the language learning process comes. Sometimes we don't know what we don't know, or know what we do know, until we actually have to use it and produce it. And so it's really important, if we want our learners to develop the language of our field and become proficient with our content, they need to be given opportunities to speak and write regularly. One of the challenges we have when we give spoken or written tasks to students is a disconnect when it comes to task representation. And so task representation is an idea that suggests that a teacher has in their mind what an assignment should be. Now, a student also has in their mind what the assignment is, whether it's from the teacher's instructions or from details provided through the learning management system. And ideally, we hope that the teacher's representation and the student's representation are aligned. But studies after studies show that often this isn't the case. Teachers think that they have provided clear instructions and students produce something that's different. And so what we can do as instructors in order to make those speaking and written tasks more effective is we can use some strategies to clarify whether the student's task representation matches our expectations. Sometimes this is as simple as asking students, okay, please explain to your partner what the homework assignment is, and then kind of eavesdropping on some conversations and finding out, did they understand it the way that you understand it? There's also, we can use things, break a larger assignment into smaller tasks. And as we do that, we can maybe catch some misunderstandings before students have put in too much time and effort into a big project that maybe took the wrong direction. Another challenge that we sometimes face with output is related to academic writing. And these ideas that are sometimes called intertextuality, textual borrowing, patchwork writing, or what most of us may know it as unintentional plagiarism. And this is when a student has maybe not cited things properly, has borrowed text from a source and has not quoted it in the way that we expect it to be quoted, so that we can clearly identify which ideas and which words have been borrowed from sources. Some of the reasons for unintentional plagiarism are just language limitations. This may happen because a student feels responsible to read a text or do an assignment that they have not yet have the language to do effectively. They can't understand the text, and so they can't paraphrase it or summarize it because they don't know what it's saying, or they don't have enough words to say it in any different way. Sometimes unintentional plagiarism arrives because of cultural differences, that students don't understand that in our Western academic culture, when we borrow ideas and words from sources, it's really important to make that very clear to our audience through quotation marks, through citations, and other means. Sometimes it's just a lack of academic experience. They're just not used to having ever had to use citations before. And this can happen with domestic students who maybe just haven't had a lot of experience with citation use in their high school study. And so when they come to university, understanding what are the expectations can be quite difficult for them. So there are some things that we can do to help address these problems with unintentional plagiarism. First, we need to recognize that in probably 99% of cases involving plagiarism at the university level, most of it is unintentional. The student is not trying to cheat. The student just doesn't understand either the text or the expectations of the assignment. So one is we can provide students with at-level tasks and at-level sources. If they have to use sources for their text, we make sure that these are sources that they can understand. We make sure that the tasks are appropriate for the level of students that we're teaching. And if it's not, that we find support structures that will help those students. I've often found that using reading and writing groups in my class can help students through this process of using sources, but also help them learn how to start paraphrasing and summarizing sources. So giving them time to meet with other students and talk about, what is your project about? What have you been reading about? Can you summarize to me what you learned about? And as students do this for one another, they can mentor each other in this process of how to use sources appropriately and effectively. I also find it helpful to separate a larger writing or speaking assignment into smaller steps. Things like find sources or annotated bibliography or research matrix, where students have to collect information, show evidence that they can summarize and paraphrase that information, and then maybe have an outline step where I can see that they're starting to now to organize their sources into a meaningful synthesis or analysis, and then some drafts before that final paper is done. If we only look at a final draft, then the student may not go through this effective process of carefully analyzing and reading sources and taking notes and developing a good outline. And we're more likely to have students who may struggle with plagiarism problems if we don't teach them a good writing process and we don't hold them accountable for employing a good writing process. And it's also good to take time in your class if possible, or create a video that you provide through the learning management system where you show students what the citation practices are for your field. And if this is something you're not as comfortable with, work with your assigned librarian, and that librarian can often come into your class or provide materials for your students about how to do citation and use sources effectively within your particular field of study. Another issue that comes up with output, both written and spoken, is this idea of native-like use of English versus intelligible use of English. And this is something that comes both from students, but it may also come from people who work with international students. Sometimes students feel like the goal is to become a native speaker of English or sound like a native speaker or writer of English. But in reality, this is a problematic title, because what is a native speaker of English? There are so many varieties of English, even here on our campus, that no one of those varieties is the correct variety. They're all acceptable. And so our students, even though they may speak with an accent, even though they may write with an accent, in the use of maybe some minor grammar issues, if they're still intelligible, that's the goal, that we can understand their message. So helping students understand that intelligibility is really the goal, not native likeness, can help them set realistic goals for how they should be improving their language. Now, that said, as much as we want students to be more intelligible in their writing and in their speaking, we often have to develop our ability to have a more intelligible ear when we're listening, or an intelligible eye when we're reading, and recognize that our focus here is, do we understand the message, and not, does this language look perfect according to our personal grammatical dialect. And yes, we want to teach students to be professional and communicate well in their writing, but ultimately our goal is content. We want to make sure that the idea is communicated clearly, not do they have the right article at the right part of the sentence. So here's some overall strategies that you could try implementing in your course to help encourage students to do more output. One of them is wait time. And this is just sort of a general educational rule that when we ask a question in class, rather than responding to the first student who shoots their hand up, we can give all students some time to decode that question, think about it, and then encode a response. And this works for all students, not just domestic students or international students. Some domestic students really need this extra wait time to help them formulate responses to questions. Now, related to this is the idea of the think, pair, and share. We can ask a question to everyone, and then rather than letting someone respond, we tell all students, hey, write down a quick answer to this question, or formulate your answer to this question. And then I want you to turn to a partner or a small group and share with that partner. And then we might share one or two examples back with the whole class. Obviously, this will take more time than just a quick answer the question and that bright student in the first row gives us the answer. But if we get more students participating and reflecting and thinking about our questions, we're getting more engagement in the classroom. This might mean we ask fewer questions, but the questions we do ask are more meaningful and more valuable, and we get more students being engaged with what that question means and how it impacts the course content. Another opportunity is to do more group work in your course. If you do group work, I strongly encourage you to allow international students to become the leaders of those groups. I've often seen when I go visit classes, international students, when it's time to break into groups, they sort of sit on their own, or if they get put into a group, they kind of let everyone else take the lead. And the truth is they have a really good perspective that they can bring to the classroom discussion. But because they may be a little bit intimidated about their language skills and not being perfect and having that native-like accent when they speak, they may not be as willing to be assertive and take on a role in the group. So if you can occasionally assign an ESL student to take on a leadership role, this can give them a chance to participate more. We also talked already about groups, but you could have review groups, excuse me, at the beginning of each class session. And where students just get with a partner or a small group and talk about what was the assignment that they had to do or the reading that they had to do. That fact of getting them to talk about the content that they were responsible for doing outside of class will help activate their language skills about that content, and it will prepare their mind for the new lesson that day. So spending 2 to 3 minutes at the beginning of class and saying, hey, review with your partner what we talked about last class session, or what the reading was, or what you did for your homework assignment, can help students activate their knowledge and recycle the vocabulary that you've been teaching them. I sometimes have faculty members come to me with the issue about, well, students wrote this paper and there's good content in there, but I'm really concerned about their ability to communicate in writing professionally. There's really some grammatical roughness to their writing. And that is a great question to ask. And often what I would suggest to instructors in that case is, if you use a rubric, have a section of your rubric devoted to language use. And if the student has the right content and they've organized their information in an effective way, you can give them strong points for that part of the paper. But then you can give them feedback in the language use section that lets them know that, hey, there are some problems with your grammar or other issues related to language that may interfere with the audience's ability to really respect and understand your message. And so that is a way to validate a student's understanding of the content and their ability to communicate it in writing, but also hold them accountable to continually work at developing their ability to present language professionally in an academic context. Lastly, another idea you can use to help students produce output that is related to what you're studying is if they have a speaking assignment or a writing assignment, you might tell them, here's some key terms that we've been studying in this unit. You need to make sure you use these key terms in either your video or your writing. And that makes students responsible for integrating that new content, but also that new language into their work. And they know that they've got to work those words into their product or their output in a meaningful way. So I hope this video has helped you see some new ways that you can encourage students to produce more speaking and more writing related to your course. Not all of it needs to be a graded assignment. Getting students to interact with one another is a great way that you can help students recycle the language of your field and learn and improve their academic English skills just by being held responsible for using it.